But remember during the election when the woke activists were all trying to demonise Liberal candidate Katherine Deves because of how she'd stood up for the rights of women and girls in sport against competition from biological males. The claim from Labor, the Tills and the virtue signallers in the Liberal Party was that this was not really an issue, that it was a nasty diversion, even though Deves had been advocating on this issue for years. And even though transgender US swimmer Leah Thomas, who couldn't crack the top 200 as a male swimmer, had won a US national championship as a woman. Well, now the World Swimming Authority has approved new rules that will ban competitors like Thomas from the women's events at the Olympics and other elite competitions. It's not about demonising Thomas or anyone else. It's about fairness and common sense. They'll look to accommodate transgender athletes in other categories, but if they've transitioned after puberty or after about 12 years of age, they won't be able to compete in women's events. Australian Olympic champion Kate Campbell actually spoke at the meeting in Europe that considered all this, and she stressed the need for inclusion and tolerance, but also the need for fairness.
Women who have fought long and hard to be included as equals in sport can only do so because of the gender category distinction. To remove this distinction would be to the detriment of female athletes everywhere.
Yeah, it's a sensible decision. Let's cross now to Fiji and get a reaction from Katherine Deves. Katherine, thanks for joining us. Sorry to interrupt your holiday, but I figure you would have been pretty pleased with this outcome.
Oh, this is absolutely vindication and a victory for women like myself, women around the world who've been advocating on this issue for quite some years. We have faced, vile abuse, opprobrium and silencing on this issue, and to see FINA stand up and put women and girls first is an absolute win.
Now, is this the satisfactory way to deal with it? Is this what you've always hoped for, that you just have a sensible, clear rule about transitioning from male to female at a certain age, and also an undertaking to do other things, to make other arrangements to cater for other transgender athletes if needs be?
Well, my concern has always been women and girls. And as we saw here with FINA, when you conduct a consultation process and it is transparent and it is impartial and we include the voices of the women who are being impacted, we end up with an overwhelming consensus with respect to women and girls. But I would argue that it doesn't go far enough because they are saying that if boys before the age of 12 undergo what we call transitioning or have their puberty arrested, they should be able to compete. Now, I would disagree with that because men and boys have the benefit of testosterone, and that begins in the womb, and they have accrued benefit that start at that time. So I would say even these boys at the age of 12 will still have benefit. So I think it doesn't go far enough. But I would like to see this policy adopted by other international federations and indeed our national federations who have failed to take into consideration the voices of Olympians and female athletes, parents, young women, all the way down to even sports at the community and the local level. I mean, this is just elite, but it's not protecting women and girls at the community and local level, and that is where my sport in Australia is played. So I think our sports bureaucrats really need to have a long, hard look at their policies and look at what FINA has done and undertake a consultation process in the way that they have done.
Yeah, I think that's important. A lot of people will say that you're still complaining, but I know that the medical, the scientific argument will go on about that 12-year-old cut-off and the science behind that. So let that go ahead. Let people keep examining that. But in terms of this being a positive first step, that's important, isn't it, from swimming? Do you think it's critical that the other sports right around the world will follow this? Obviously, you've just said that, but my point is this will tend to set down a template, won't it? It seems logical that most Olympic sports will tend to follow this.
Let's hope so. I mean, World Rugby did something similar a couple of years ago. And what's happened with many of these trans inclusion policies, they haven't been conducted in a transparent and impartial way. So when you do have the consultation process that does, as I said, include the voices of the female athletes, and it is done in such a way that it has public consensus, that it has public input, inevitably people want women and girls to have a dedicated female sports category. So if the other sports undertake inquiries in such a fashion, I have no doubt they'll come to the same conclusion.
Now, I want to show you, Katherine, something that the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, said about this today. Here he is.
This is one of the reasons why this issue shouldn't have been an attempt to make this a political issue during the last federal election campaign. Guidelines are very clear that it's up to sporting bodies. They will make their decisions based upon their assessments, and that is appropriate.
Now, I find that extraordinary, Katherine, firstly because you didn't try to make this an issue during the election campaign. All your critics did, didn't they?
That's right. I never intended it to be a major piece of policy that I was going to campaign on. And further to what Albanese said, if we're not going to talk about these social issues at an election, when else are we going to talk about it? But when I did have my detractors, which included members of my own party and indeed my own opponent here in Warringah, who looked to malign me by attempting to have me disendorsed because I had raised this issue, and now it turns out with FINA's decision that I have been somewhat vindicated.
I think you have. And this is the other point about with Anthony Albanese. He said the sports are looking after it, so politicians shouldn't talk about it. That's wrong. People, the public, politicians have to have a say on these issues. Otherwise, the sports might not do the sensible thing.
That's right. And they haven't in Australia. The policies right now are saying that gender identity is the basis upon which sporting categories are determined. So in Australia, they're simply not doing their job. The legislation is not doing their job. And further to Albanese, I mean, in his policy for the federal election, they said that a woman was anyone who identifies as one. So I find it quite implausible that Mr Albanese would even know what he's talking about when he doesn't even know what a woman is.
Katherine, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate you interrupting your Fijian holiday for us, and but congratulations. It is vindication for the arguments you've been making.
Thank you very much, Chris. Have a great evening.
Katherine Deves there, the former Liberal candidate for the seat of Warringah. I got a feeling she might stick her head up again sometime.